Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the spine-tingling world of the Jiangshi. And let me tell you, this is a strange, deeply mysterious creature that completely shatters our typical Western understanding of the undead.
I want you to just picture this for a second. You're walking alone at night through a misty bamboo forest. Or maybe you're passing by the crumbling walls of an abandoned rural temple. Now imagine encountering an entirely different type of entity hiding in those deep shadows. Seriously, what exactly lurks in the dark corners of Chinese folklore? Well, it's a compelling mystery that has literally captivated and terrified people for generations. So today, we're shining a light right on that mystery and bringing you straight into the heart of a very different kind of ghost story.
Section 1. Not your average vampire.
Okay, so when we think of monsters, we usually have a pretty specific set of expectations built into our minds, right? But we need to completely subvert those expectations right now. On one side of the cultural spectrum, you've got the typical Western monster. A creature that runs or maybe silently stalks its prey, much like a traditional Dracula-style vampire. But the Eastern monster, it operates on entirely different biological and magical rules. It doesn't run, it doesn't stalk. Actually, it moves entirely with stiff limbs, relying on this eerie, continuous hopping motion. Traditional lore basically dictates that when rigor mortis sets into corpses resurrected via dark magic or an improper burial, their joints become completely unbendable. Just imagine the terrifying rhythmic thud-thud-thud of heavy, rigid hopping rapidly approaching you in the dark. It's a completely different, deeply visceral kind of dread.
Section 2. Anatomy of the Jiangshi.
So the crucial point of understanding really begins with the name itself, the Jiangshi. And this entity carries a fascinating dual translation in English. You'll often hear it referred to as either the Chinese zombie or the hopping vampire. Having these concrete terms gives us a perfect lens to examine its nature. It shares the undead, reanimated, mindless qualities we normally associate with a zombie, but it also carries that predatory mythology we associate with a vampire. However, there's a massive physiological distinction here that really elevates the horror. While a Western vampire is famously driven to drink blood, a Jiangshi absorbs qi. That's the life force, the vital energy of the living. It doesn't necessarily want to bite your neck, it wants to drain the very essence of your existence. That makes it a uniquely terrifying parasitic force.
Let's visualize this step by step because the physical image is genuinely striking and functional. First up, the stiff limbs. We're talking a rigidity so absolute that the creature literally cannot bend its knees or elbows. Second, because it can't walk normally, it's forced to navigate by hopping through the night, announcing its presence with that dread-inducing sound of its shoes striking the earth. It's an auditory warning deeply ingrained in Chinese folklore. And third, and honestly, this is perhaps the most chilling detail of the whole shebang, it hops with its arms stretched rigidly forward. This posture isn't just visually horrifying either, it's practically designed for its rigid momentum. It allows the creature to balance as it hops, all while keeping its hands perfectly positioned to blindly grasp and strangle its prey in the dark.
Section 3. Ancient beliefs and spirits.
Now, the Jiangshi isn't just some random scary story invented to frighten kids around a campfire. Not at all. It's deeply and fundamentally rooted in ancient Chinese beliefs surrounding death, spirits, and the absolute critical importance of proper burial rites. Specifically, this legend is tied to the real, historical Taoist practice of corpse driving. Centuries ago, if a traveling worker or merchant died far from home, it was absolutely vital that their physical body be transported back to their hometown. They needed a proper burial alongside their ancestors so their soul could find peace. But because transportation back then was incredibly difficult, Taoist priests would perform rituals to seemingly animate these corpses, magically driving them to hop along in a line under the cover of night. But, and here's the catch, if this burial was delayed, or if the body absorbed too much yin energy from the moonlight, or if the ritual just flat out failed, the soul would become trapped and corrupted. The end result? A resentful, reanimated corpse violently separated from the natural cycle of life and death.
Section 4. Rituals of the villagers.
These profound cultural beliefs meant the Jiangshi literally terrified villagers for centuries. The fear was incredibly real, palpable, and omnipresent in rural communities. And because that fear was so concrete, it inspired a whole array of specific, actionable religious rituals and defenses. People didn't just hide under their beds, They actively developed sophisticated spiritual countermeasures. For example, folklore dictated that a Jiangshi tracked its prey by sensing their breath, which is the literal outflow of their qi. Therefore, a primary defense was simply holding your breath as the creature hopped past, effectively rendering yourself entirely invisible to its supernatural senses. Villagers would also scatter sticky rice across their thresholds, which they believed would physically burn the undead flesh and draw out the dark magic of the corpse. And perhaps most famously, Taoist priests utilized paper talismans. These were strips of yellow paper inscribed with mystical characters using ink made from chicken blood. If you could manage to slap one of these talismans directly onto the forehead of a Jiangshi, it would instantly paralyze the creature, stopping its rampage cold.
Section 5. Icons of Chinese cinema.
The evolutionary journey of this creature is absolutely incredible when we map it out chronologically. Starting back in the ancient era, the legend was entirely driven by fundamental beliefs about unquiet spirits and complex Taoist burial rituals. Then, moving into centuries past, those concepts evolved into highly localized nightmares. It profoundly terrified villagers and necessitated all those intricate protective religious rituals we just talked about. Finally, we arrive at the modern day, where the Jiangshi undergoes a really remarkable transformation, from a rural nightmare into a true cinematic icon. This cultural leap was heavily cemented during the massive 1980s Hong Kong cinematic boom. The genre-defining 1985 classic film, Mr. Vampire, was a real game-changer. It masterfully blended traditional folklore, martial arts action, and supernatural horror, totally bridging the gap between ancient fears and modern media. It even codified the monster's modern visual aesthetic. In the movies, they're outfitted almost exclusively in the dark, restrictive official robes of the Qing Dynasty, which is a great nod to the era when many of these tales were first popularized. Through this cinematic explosion, the Jiangshi stepped out of the shadows to stand proudly as one of Asia's most recognizable supernatural entities.
We've traced an absolutely incredible path today, witnessing a creature evolve from a terrifying village warning about proper burial into a globally recognized cinematic icon that still thrills modern moviegoers. But seeing this evolution, well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? From village nightmares to cinematic icons, what other ancient spirits are waiting in the shadows? I really hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity to look a little deeper into the rich, untold folklore of our world. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
Okay, picture this. You're walking through the shadows of an ancient Chinese village, right around midnight. Suddenly, you hear a rhythmic, heavy thud in the distance. Thud, thud, thud. As you peer into the darkness, you don't see a wolf or some dark cloaked figure. You see this strange creature. And here's the thing, this entity doesn't run. It doesn't stalk. It moves entirely with stiff, rigid limbs, hopping through the night with its arms stretched straight forward.
Now, there's a stark contrast here. When we think of Western monsters, your classic vampires, your modern zombies, your werewolves, we usually picture agile hunters. They run, they stalk their prey from the shadows, they aggressively feast on blood or brains. But this Eastern creature, it's totally different. Stiff limbs, hopping, stretched arms. It's an entirely different, incredibly visceral mechanical movement. It's unsettling precisely because it's just so unnatural.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to demystify one of Asia's most recognizable and, frankly, most fascinating supernatural creatures, the Jiangshi. Let's unearth not just what this creature is, but why it was created in the first place.
All right, part 1. Let's meet the hopping vampire, often introduced as the Chinese zombie.
Moving on to part 2, we're looking at those stiff limbs and properly defining the Jiangshi. Okay, let's dive right into this, because the terminology here is incredibly literal. The word Jiangshi actually combines two Chinese characters. First, you have Jiang, which means rigid or stiff. Then there's Shi, which means corpse. Put them together, and Jiangshi literally means stiff corpse. And this linguistic breakdown explains absolutely everything about the creature's iconic movement. When rigor mortis sets in, the body becomes unbendable. The creature literally cannot bend its knees or its elbows. Therefore, the only way a stiff corpse can possibly move forward is to hop.
So, let's compare their dietary habits, because this is where the lore really diverges. Modern zombies are typically driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh, right? But unlike modern zombies that feast on flesh, traditional Jiangshi are reanimated corpses that absorb a person's life force, known as qi. They literally drain the vital energy right out of the living. It's a terrifying concept, honestly, because they aren't just eating your physical body, they are consuming your very essence.
Next up, let's explore the rules of reanimation by looking at beliefs about death and ancient spirits.
So, you might be wondering, how does this actually happen? Well, according to folklore, a dead body could become a Jiangshi for a few very specific reasons. A person might die violently, leaving them with restless, unresolved energy. Or a soul might fail to leave the body entirely, remaining permanently trapped in its physical shell. It could also be that improper burial rituals simply disturb the dead,
Or finally, supernatural forces could intentionally reanimate a corpse for nefarious purposes. But if you look closely, every single one of these causes shares a common theme: a major disruption of the natural order of life and death.
This brings us to the cultural mirror, the religious rituals and ancient beliefs that fueled these fears.
You see, ancient Chinese culture placed an enormous, absolute importance on honoring ancestors and conducting proper funeral ceremonies. This wasn't just about saying a fond goodbye to a loved one. This was a high-stakes tradition deeply rooted in filial piety. Failure to respect these traditions and honor the dead correctly was believed to invite sheer disaster upon not just the family, but the entire community.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the myth is so powerful. Stories of the Jiangshi directly reflected these underlying fears. The monster represented what happened when death was not properly managed. The Jiangshi wasn't just some scary story to tell around the fire to spook the kids. It was a manifestation of society's deepest anxieties. It was literally a walking, hopping warning sign. If you don't take care of your ancestors, if you don't follow the proper burial rites, your loved ones simply won't find peace. Instead, they'll literally come back as stiff corpses to drain your life force. It's a culturally specific fear translated perfectly into a physical monster.
Finally, let's look at its legacy, from folklore to film and becoming icons of cinema.
The evolution of this creature is truly remarkable to look back on. For centuries, the Jiangshi legitimately terrified villagers, serving as this dark enforcer of social and religious norms. This fear was so real that it directly inspired specialized religious rituals, where Taoist priests would have to perform specific rites using paper talismans and spells just to subdue these stiff corpses. But eventually, as society modernized, the monster evolved right along with it. It leapt from an ancient village terror onto the silver screen, becoming an absolute icon of Chinese and Asian cinema, and blending horror, martial arts, and comedy into a genre entirely its own.
So, we've seen how a stiff corpse, hopping through the night to drain qi, was the perfect embodiment of a culture's fear of mismanaging death and dishonoring their ancestors. Which leaves me with a question I really want you to think about. If the Jiangshi represented those ancient, deeply held cultural fears, what do today's popular monsters say about our current anxieties? Think about the monsters that absolutely dominate our screens right now. What are they trying to warn us about? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and keep exploring the history hiding right behind our nightmares.